can sit, that's fine. Have him sit.
Yeah, I gotta have the notebook of it. Eventually.
Your mic is working.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're ready? Okay. Good morning, veterans, family, and guests. I am humbled to stand before you, you who have sacrificed so much that we might enjoy the freedoms we have today. I am honored, privileged, and indebted to you. Thank you for your service and sacrifice. My name is Cindy Grunert, and I am a quilter. I volunteer for Quilts of Valor, and it has become a passion of mine. My father-in-law was a World War II veteran, and I currently have a nephew who is in the Air Force as a JAG officer at the Pentagon. The Quilt of Valor Foundation is a national 501c3 organization. Our mission is to cover veterans and military personnel with healing and comforting quilts called Quilts of Valor. Our foundation represents one human reaching out, touching another without judgment, reaching out with the acceptance and the acknowledgement of their service to our nation under very trying circumstances. With a son stationed in Iraq, our founder, Catherine Roberts, dreamt of a young man surrounded by his war demons in the middle of the night. Her next vision was a young man wrapped in his quilt. His demeanor changed to one of hope and well-being. Thus began the journey of Quilts of Soldiers, now known as the Quilts of Valor Foundation. Catherine's first quilt was delivered to Walter Reed Hospital in November of 2003 by Colonel John Callerson. The words he spoke then are the words we still use today. The quilt I award today will join the over 405,000 quilts that have been awarded nationwide. A Quilt of Valor is a lifetime award. A quilt is not a blanket. A blanket is a single fat layer of fabric. A quilt consists of 3 layers, and we like to think of it in these terms. The top of the quilt, with its many color, shapes, and fabric, represent the many faces of all those who have served in our armed forces, our communities, and the many individuals we are. The center of the quilt contains the batting, the part of the quilt that emits the warmth. Held between the layers, it represents the comfort and healing we offer. The back is the strength that supports the other layers of fabric and represents the strength of the recipient. The quilt is held together with thousands of stitches that represent you, your families, and our communities, all coming together to support one another. The quilt represents the gratitude of our citizens for your service and sacrifice. We offer them as a tangible civilian award to thank you for the protection of our freedoms. A quilt of valor is priceless. It can never be bought. It can never be sold. It is never a gift. Know as we are stitching, we are remembering the sacrifices you made for us. It is a quilt that comes from the heart and hands and sometimes the tears of the maker. No two are alike. What is the same is the love that is quilted in each stitch. Today it is my honor, Jim, to award you with your Quilt of Valor. While we always remember those killed in action and those missing in action, a Quilt of Valor is for you, the living. Today we offer you comfort and healing. We offer you our deepest gratitude for your sacrifice. As you are wrapped in the warmth of the quilt, we ask you to accept it with a hug. It not only comes from me, but all the Quilts of Valor members. Sarah.
While Cindy is awarding the quilt, she had asked me to do a short introduction into about Dad. So put on my reading glasses and I'll read it. James Peterson began his service in the Navy in 1960 and served until 1969. He was honorably discharged as a lieutenant. James attended flight school in Pensacola, Florida, and earned his wings there. He also sang with the Naval Air Command Choir from 1960 to 1961. Jim was then stationed at Coronado, California, Corpus Christi, Texas, and then finally at the Naval Reserves in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was a naval aviator who served tours of duty on the USS Yorktown from 1962 to 1965. He was a member of the VS-23 Black Cats Squadron. They were part of the Carrier Anti-Submarine Air Group 55, CVSG 55, assigned to the Yorktown for 2 Vietnam deployments, November 1962 through June 1963, and October 1964 to May of 1965. Dad then trained pilots in Corpus Christi before moving back to Minnesota and served in the reserves.
On behalf of the Quilts of Valor Foundation, we serve, honor, and comfort you, though we may never know the depths of your sacrifice to protect and defend the United States of America as a gesture of gratitude from a grateful nation. Today, I award you with your Quilt of Valor, Jim. Welcome home, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So that ends the Quilts of Valor part of it. Quilts of Valor has partnered with the Department of Defense to honor Vietnam-era veterans with a special Vietnam Veteran Lapel Pin. Each QOV recipient who served on active duty between November 1st of 1955 and May 15th, 1975, regardless of their assignment, will receive a pin. So on behalf of the President of the United States, the Department of Defense, Sarah had the honor of pinning you with your pin.
Thank you. I accept this quilt in honor of and in memory of Don Gerstel, Mick Mickelson, Chuck Connors, James Shrek, Chuck Fedema, and Frank Bennett. These are 6 friends of mine who did not make it home from Vietnam. And their names are on the wall. So thank you again. And those comrades of mine that are forever in my heart. Oh, I don't know. Do you want me to start my little presentation right away or what? I,
I want to mention, on his quilt, there is a label that says this is Quilt of Valor, his name, where it was awarded, today's date, and who made it.
wow, incredible. Thank you. I had no idea that this many people would come to anything like this anyway, and I hope I'm not going to bore anybody about what it's like living on an aircraft carrier or flying off an aircraft carrier. Some of it may be a little technical, and if it goes over your head, I apologize, but it's I can only speak, of course, about the way it was 60 years ago. But surprisingly enough, the overall operation on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier has changed very little. The biggest change is that how airplanes are launched off the catapult. When I was there was a hard point underneath the bottom of the fuselage of airplanes that the bridle would be hooked to, and that would launch the airplanes. They have now switched to what we call nose tows. All airplanes today are towed off the catapult by the nose wheel, by the nose gear. So that's why Navy airplane flight, their nose gears are so massive, because they have to be. One of the bigger airplanes, as an example, is the A6. That's a 62,000-pound airplane, and that nose gear has to withstand going from 0 to 150 miles an hour in 2 seconds. So that's a pretty powerful landing gear. And other than that, the operation, it may look chaotic. Sometimes it looks really chaotic, but it is a highly organized, highly orchestrated symphony of motion that makes things work. There is an example, all the colors of the shirts that people wear are the same. The lords of the flight deck wear yellow shirts. They control all aircraft movement on the flight deck, whether they're taxiing under their own power or by a tow vehicle. It's all under the direction of a yellow shirt. The catapult officer, the arresting gear officer, and all those people wear yellow shirts. The most numerous ones, other than that, are the blue shirts, and they kind of take care of a lot of things, all of the rolling stock, if you will, on the flight deck. They drive the tractors and all that sort of stuff. And another of the very important people, they wear green shirts. And I have a green shirt that I'm looking at right now. My brother-in-law, John Orr, wore a green shirt on the deck of the USS Forrestal. And they are primarily maintenance people, but they do a lot of other things as well. John was a hookup man. He hooks the airplane up to the catapult system. So again, the shirts are the same color as they always have been. Red shirts, they're ordnance people. We call them cannon cockers. They loaded all the weapons on the airplanes and so on. Purple shirts were fuel people. We call them grapes. And they refuel all of the airplanes. And then they have brown shirts. those are plane captains, and they basically are assigned an airplane. Whenever that airplane moves, there's a plane captain in it to ride the brakes in case they are necessary. And the Brown Shirts are fond of saying that they own the airplanes. They just loan the pilots to use them for a couple hours every day. And then white, they're specialty inspectors. They are first aid people and, other specialty people like that. And also the landing signal officers, of which I was one. So I wore white when I was on the flight deck too. I'm going to make a bold statement now, and then I'm going to prove it along the way. Navy carrier pilots are the best instrument pilots in the world. That does not take away anything from my other flying brethren, like Bill Reamer, who's here today, Air Force F-4 pilot, fighter pilot. But it's just that there is no other pilot group anywhere in aviation that is called upon to do what we have to do on a daily basis. And I'll explain that as we go along quickly. Wilson Rowan wanted to know a little bit about my training to begin with. And first of all, I have to say training never ends. We train all the time. All of the flights that we did, part of that is also training. And I'll explain that too. But to begin with, there's 16 weeks of pre-flight, we called it. That's basically boot camp, where you learn to be military. After 16 weeks of pre-flight, you finally get to see an airplane. And so you spend 30 hours in the T-34. Where's my show and tell thing?
It's all on screen.
What?
It's all on the screen behind you. So what we
Oh, I can't see it, huh? Oh, it's up there, yeah. You have to back it up to there. That's the T-34 that I learned to fly in. Get 30 hours in that airplane. And then you transition from that to the T-28, which is a much bigger airplane. That's 8,500-pound airplane with basically the same performance as some of the World War II fighters. You get 120 hours in that airplane, and you'll learn to do a lot of fun stuff in it. You'll learn to fly formation. You get to shoot guns at target sleeves. And the creme de la creme, you get to land on the ship the first time. So 120 hours in the T-28, and once you're carrier qualified, then you go on to advanced training, which is the next airplane on the queue there. That's the S-2. That's what I flew. It's a twin-engine anti-submarine warfare airplane that weighed 26,000 pounds. That's the training command version, so that's all of the equipment is taken out of it. So it's much lighter it's way less than 26,000 pounds. But you get 150 hours in that airplane, heavily involved in instrument flying, absolute precise instrument flying. And again, you get to carrier qualify in that airplane as well, which basically at the end of your flight training. So totally, you get about 300 hours of flight training to become a naval aviator. And in addition to that, the instrument rating you have qualifies you to fly anywhere in the ATC system, air traffic control system in the United States. You are totally qualified. So we'll go from there to what we call a RAG group. You don't have orders to a fleet squadron right away. You have to go to a replacement air group squadron, which in my case was VS-41 in San Diego. Now that picture up there is a little premature, but that's okay. That's my very first flight crew, and I'm top left guy there. And that was quite a thrill to be part of a flight crew in my fleet squadron of VS-23. But the RAG group, you finally get in touch with the equipment that is used in the fleet airplanes and how to use it. Oh, okay. So again, you get a lot of instrument training. Again, you get carrier qualified again in the daytime, not at night. So then you finally get to your fleet squadron. And again, you have to get carrier qualified again in the daytime and at night. And then once you're finally day and night qualified on the ship, you are qualified as what we call a nugget. You are a nugget, a new naval aviator that's fully qualified. But now, start proving my bold statement. In April of 1965, off of Vietnam, our ship operated around the clock for 49 days at one stretch without a break. We had 6 airplanes in the air 24/7. Now, there are 2 S-2 squadrons on the ship when each aircraft squadron had 11 airplanes. But each squadron had to have 12 airplanes ready to fly in every 24-hour period. So it was very difficult on machinery and people, airplanes and people. You get extremely tired. Hard on maintenance. Now, I have to mention here that you're not just a pilot in the Navy. You're a naval officer first and a pilot second. So all Navy pilots, we all had a day job. So we had to do our day job as well as fly the airplanes 24/7. And we got very, very tired. But just for fun, let's go on a normal flight, which under some difficult conditions, but certainly not unusual ones. We're going to launch off the ship at night with weather of 600-foot overcast, 5 miles visibility, and haze, not unusual for the Gulf of Tonkin. And tonight's flight, we launch at 10 o'clock at night and recover at 4 o'clock in the morning. So 2200 to 0400. Now again, we've had to do our day job, and this went on day after day after day after day after day for 49 days. So during the brief for the flight, we got a weather brief, search section assignment, an intelligence brief, aircraft assignment, and other things of importance. When the brief was complete, the white lights in the ready room were turned out, and the red lights were turned on, because we had to start getting dark adapted. There weren't many lights on the flight deck. We even had to pre-flight our airplanes with a red lens in our flashlight, which is kind of hard to do looking for hydraulic leaks because hydraulic fluid's red. So if we found something that looked suspicious, we'd have to get a maintenance person over there to check it out. But how did we navigate? I don't know if you've seen videos of World War II pilots, Navy pilots running to their airplanes with this, not much bigger than this, piece of equipment in their hands. It's called a plotting board. We had the same thing. It was about 16 inches square. Every pilot had to use one because you fly for 6 hours. You could be more than 300 miles away from your ship with no communications available because you're at low altitude. So how do you navigate? In the daytime, we got pretty good at getting the wind off the water. But at night, in instrument conditions, that's not happening. And you don't know if you have a current altimeter setting, which is basically barometric pressure. You hear that on TV every day. But the barometric pressure could be considerably different from where the ship is and where you might be. So a vital piece of equipment in our airplane was a radar altimeter, which pinged off the water. And it was only good from 500 feet down anyway, but from 500 feet, we had to have the radar altimeter or the airplane was down. But again, it was a matter of safety. We were limited to fly at 300 feet at night. 100 feet in the daytime, 300 feet at night. So, what's important from the other part of the equation? The ship's PIM, P-I-M, position and intended movement. Heavy on the intended. You know. The ship says, this is where I am, and this is where I intend to be 6 hours from now. So you put the ship in the middle of your plotting board, and then you plot it ahead for 6 hours, and hopefully the ship's going to be there when you come back from your search course. I should back up a little bit. We were tasked with keeping track of all the shipping into and out of Haiphong Harbor, which was a pretty easy mission, but that was only part of it. We were also tasked with trying to figure out the bad guys from the good guys in smaller boats off the coast of Vietnam. They were still infiltrating men in arms by the sea at that time. Well, that mission was impossible. Every little boat had a covered deck, and you had no idea what was underneath that covered deck. Even a helicopter couldn't. You had to physically board the boat to ensure that there were no people on it. So that precipitated what they called a Mike boat program off of Vietnam, and that finally stopped the infiltration with men in arms by the sea. They had to physically board every little boat out there, but we had to keep track of them. And I won't go into the whole thing. It was just such a joke. So anyways, I should mention one thing about the catapult. This is dark now, and you have not seen dark unless you've been in a cave with the lights out, until you've seen dark at sea with no horizon, overcast with no horizon. It is a black hole. And you're strapped to the catapult, and you're looking out there at nothing. And you know in 2 seconds you're going to be flying. So you have to actually start your instrument scan before the catapult even fires. Because if you don't, you can be in trouble. You had to brace the yoke with one hand, and you had your throttles up here with the other, and scan the instrument panel. Now, as soon as the catapult fires, you can't read anything. It's all shaken. But 2 seconds later, you got to be on your instrument scan again so you don't balloon off the cat or whatever. Lots of things could happen that way. So yeah, you have to develop, again, here's back to the instruments again. You had to develop your scan and start your scan before the catapult even fired. So then you're out there grinding around for 5.5 hours. And then the first big test is where your navigation is. When to break off your search pattern to make sure you get back to the ship by 3:45. Well, that's a pretty big swag, you know. A big guess on some areas, unless you're pretty sure about your navigation. So everybody has to get back to the ship at the same time. So recovery is at 0400. So The ship has a navigational facility called a TACAN. Don't ask me what the acronym stands for, I don't know. But it's the same system that is used in our country in the air traffic control system. They're called VORs in the civilian world. But it's just basically the same system. Now each ship has its own TACAN. It's mounted at the top of the mast. Now, on the land, there's no problem because it ain't moving. But the ship moves in different directions all the time. So it has to be oriented to north all the time. So I'll draw that out here in a minute. But you come back to the ship and to a holding pattern, what was called Marshall. And the first guy that checks in with the ship, coming back from his search pattern, the ship will say, Abilene 10 cleared Marshall 090, 10 miles, Angels 1. That means you're cleared to your holding pattern, which is 090 degrees straight east from the ship at 10 miles. That is a fix. That is a fix. Because we have distance measuring equipment to tell us that's 10 miles. So the second guy that checks in gets the same clearance, except he's Angels 2. Third guy, Angels 3, and so on up to Angels 6, the final guy that checks in. Now, when everybody is checked in, we're all given a time tack. So we know exactly, everybody is exactly on the same time. Yeah, that's good. Which will come into play here in a little bit. You are required to stay within your holding pattern. Holding airspeed is 120 knots, or 140 miles an hour, thereabouts. And maintain your altitude, and you must maintain the fix, your holding fix. Didn't draw that very good. That's the ship, the angled deck here. So the ship is here, 090, 10 miles, right there. So you're at 1,000 foot intervals. Now, when it's time to start the approaches, recovery, as they say, is at 0400. The first airplane, so you're stacked up here, 6,000 feet. The first guy gets his clearance. He must depart that spot, exact spot, on the second. Not 5 seconds ahead, not 5 seconds late. On the second. Now, you say, well, that's doable. Well, it's doable, but it ain't easy. Because that fix is moving. It may not move very fast, but it's moving. Could be 25 knots in whatever direction. It could be going southwest. So, but you still have to depart that exact spot on the second. If you depart over 5 seconds early or late, you have to tell them. Departing Marshall 5 seconds early, departing Marshall 5 seconds late. The reason for that is the captain of the ship only wants to be into the wind absolutely only as long as he has to. Because when he's captive to the wind, he's vulnerable. And again, I say training never ends. We train for the worst case scenario all the time. The North Vietnamese didn't have any submarines, obviously. But we had to train this way so we are ready in case. So, again, you have to depart your holding fix exactly on the second. And then the airplanes in the stack, they must maintain exactly 120 knots, exactly 1,000 foot per minute rate of descent, and still stay within their holding pattern and depart that fix on the second, every one of them. So you have to trust your buddies above and below you that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing because there's only 1,000 feet between you. So that's why we have to be so precise. So we depart Marshall on time, but let's assume that number 2 departs 5 seconds late, or 10 seconds late. And number 3 departs 10 seconds early. Now instead of 1 minute intervals between those two airplanes, there's only 40 seconds. Now in the daytime on the ship, we have to have 45 seconds between airplanes in order for the deck to be, landing area to be cleared, the arresting gear back in battery and ready to accept another landing, and everybody clear the landing area. So 45 seconds in the daytime, VFR conditions. But a minute at night. It takes longer at night to make sure everything is going to work. So the captain of the ship, as I say, he wants 1 minute between airplanes. And I'll tell you, that's not easy to do. When you get down and do your approach and get vectored in here, you're finally down to 300 feet and 3 miles, and the controller will say, call the ball. And I guarantee you, even at 3 miles at night, the landing area looks like this. And you're going to line up on that and stay lined up on that and maintain your proper airspeed. Our approach speed, once we're all dirtied up, got gear down, flaps down, hook down, is 95 knots, which is basically 110 miles an hour. So we have to maintain exactly the right speeds until you get to 3 miles, and then everybody is at 95 knots. So hopefully there's going to be 1 minute between airplanes, and no one is going to have to go around. But these two airplanes now, only 40 seconds in between. There isn't time to get a clear deck. So that second airplane's going to have to get a wave off. And then he gets vectored off into the Thule's somewhere and has to go all the way around, and then he becomes tail end Charlie. He's the last one to come aboard. And the ship is, as far as the captain of the ship is concerned, he's wasted 5 or 10 minutes, and he ain't happy. Because, again, he is captive to the wind. He can't move. And he needs to move. And first of all, aircraft carriers are never alone. They're always steaming in concert with a group of other ships. Squadron of destroyers, a few other supply ships, and so on. And that requires a good chunk of ocean. And he has to make sure everybody's doing the staying in formation and so on. So the captain's job is a big one as well. And again, he doesn't want to be into the wind any longer than he has to. He may be running out of sea room, or he may be running into some other thing else. But in wartime, of course, he's vulnerable to submarines when he's locked onto the wind. Now, the ship can make its own wind if it has to. It's capable of doing that. If there's no wind over the water, the ship can make its own wind. It can do 35 knots. The jet people like to have 28 knots of wind over the deck and we like to have 24. But the thing is, when the ship has to make all its own wind, it's going straight ahead. Landing deck is 10 degrees off this way. So the airplanes have a built-in 10-degree crosswind to land. So it's very, very precise. And that's why we're the best instrument pilots in the world. Now, if you're the number one airplane and you land, it was not unusual for them to park you number one on the bow. And in a black night, that's not easy to do either. If I was that guy, so long as the taxi director, the wands, are out here in front of me, I would taxi right along. But when he gets out of here, I taxi very, very slowly, because they literally put you number one on the bow, just before the round down, just within a couple of feet of the round down. So I was pretty cautious when I got up there. Now you can go on YouTube and look at a lot of different carrier operation videos, and it's interesting to do that. There's one in particular that I've enjoyed very much, a naval aviator who makes the videos and then he narrates on top of them to tell you exactly what he's doing and why, even on the deck and everything. And you might look that up. You might just type in carrier operations by Pale. Not pale as in lack of color, pale as in bucket. Pale. He's the naval aviator that does those. And he's very, very good. And he shows one where he's taxiing that airplane, and it looks like he's going to taxi over the edge. So we get very, very close. It's measured distances on the ship, as John well knows, measured in short feet, inches sometimes, because there isn't that much room on the flight deck. Oh, what else am I missing here? Oh, yeah. When you get on your approach, when you finally do acquire the meatball, you have to develop another scan. It's meatball, lineup, airspeed, meatball, lineup, airspeed, meatball, lineup, airspeed. Now at night, that can be very difficult to do because two of those cues are outside the cockpit. One of them is inside. Meatball, lineup, airspeed. Now the jets have it a little easier. They have an angle of attack indicator up on the glare shield, and they don't care what their airspeed is. They have meatball, lineup, angle of attack. Meatball, lineup, angle of attack, but it's all outside the cockpit, which is good and is easier to handle. But the difference is, and again, I have the utmost respect for the jet jockeys. They're doing it so much faster than we did. When we're doing that meatball lineup airspeed at 95 knots, they're at 130. So, and another difficult transition is if you miss all the wires at night. It's called a bolter anyway, but it's called a bolter. So if you bolter at night, here you've been flying for 6 hours, you're exhausted, you're flying instruments all the time, then you get a very short period of time of visual with very few visual cues, and then you take the cut and you miss all the wires, you're instantly black in the black hole again, and you must reestablish your instrument scan instantaneously. That is an incredibly difficult transition to make. So again, we're not better than anybody, more physically qualified than anybody. We're just trained differently because we have to be. So. Oh, I guess I was going to do more on the board, but I didn't get, didn't happen. I guess it's okay. Did anyone have any questions? Yes, Wilson. Well, I'm sure there are. The testing we did to become naval aviators, yeah, it was pretty rigid. But not everybody is going to be a carrier pilot either. And I don't remember any other specific testing or qualifications necessary to become a carrier pilot. It kind of took care of itself. If you're not doing well in training, you're not going to be doing well on the ship, and they'll ultimately reassign you somewhere else. The washout rate? I think overall about 30%. Yeah, it's not that high. But the overall attrition rate is easily 30%. Yeah. Oh, yeah, there wasn't a good way to bring that up. If anybody is interested to look at this later, this is called a hook point. This is off of my airplane, or the airplane I flew. This is what actually engages the cross-deck pendant, or the cable on the ship. Looks like a horse's hoof. And the cable, it engages the cable right here. And remarkable thing about these things, this is a used one, so it has probably 50 carrier landings on it. They are changed every 50 landings regardless of condition. 50 traps, you get a new hook point. And this is called a holdback fitting or a tension bar. This hooks up to a part of the ship, part of the catapult gear, and this part is installed in the airplane. It's just hooked into the. So when you take tension on the cat, you're pulled forward and you're pulled from behind and held rigid with this tension bar. So the airplane ain't moving until the catapult fires. When the catapult fires, this is engineered to break right here. So every time an airplane launches off the ship, you use one holdback fitting. That's one advantage now of the nose tow system. They're internal, and they don't have these anymore. Does the same function once you're tensioned up on the cat, but you don't have to destroy one every time you launch an airplane. Thank you. The flight deck's a very dangerous place to work, but as they say, it is a highly orchestrated symphony of motion that everybody knows what they're doing and how and when to do it. So all my years on the flight deck, I have controlled as a landing signal officer over 7,000 shipboard landings. I should say a little more about that probably. And I've never seen an accident. An accident occurred while I was aboard, but I never saw it. I was in my room where an airplane went in the water off the ship, but I never saw an accident. What? Well, on our ship, there were, as I say, two S-2 squadrons with 11 airplanes each, so it's 22. We had a helicopter squadron that had 16 airplanes, and a detachment of A-1s had 5 airplanes, plus the ship's own COD, they called it, the carrier onboard delivery airplane, and our own plane guard destroyer, helicopter. So whatever that total was, wasn't keeping track. Yes. I have, and I say it this way for a reason, I have come aboard various aircraft carriers over 800 times. Now, I flew a multi-engine airplane, so I got as many carrier landings in the right seat as I did in the left almost, probably more so when I was instructing in the training command. What's that? Well, even under normal conditions, there's very little light on the flight deck. The newer ships, of course, their lighting systems are totally different. But on our ship, the landing area had what they call dustpan lights. And it's like a dustpan, turned upside down, and the lights underneath it would get a little. But that was all. I was going to say something about being a landing signal officer. I'm equally as proud of controlling that many shipboard landings without an accident as I am my carrier landings. Now, to be a landing signal officer, you don't volunteer to become a landing signal officer. You have to be chosen by the current landing signal officers. And you have to be, first of all, well above average on the ship and your abilities on the ship to be considered. And again, I'm not saying this to brag, that's just the way it works. And then they look at your personality. How you're able to communicate with junior officers and senior officers, all the way up to the air group commander. Because you don't care who's flying that airplane as an LSO. You're looking at the airplane. And if the airplane is not doing what he's supposed to be doing, you get rid of him. And you don't care if it's the commanding officer. You're not interested in who's flying the airplane. So there's a personality involved, as well. And again, I'm very proud of being a landing signal officer. You could tell, I could tell your airspeed or the airspeed of the airplane coming at me within a knot or two of his airspeed, just by looking at him. I could tell if he's accelerating, decelerating, had too much power, not enough power, was not lined up properly. There's no magic involved. You just had to watch thousands and thousands and thousands of landings, which kind of contributed to my hearing aids. Yes.
You should mention the various carriers you are.
Well, I'm not sure I can even tell you how many carriers I was on. The reason I got on so many ships is because I was a landing signal officer. And whenever we needed to qualify pilots, we used whatever deck might be available. So I was that's how I got on all the West Coast boats. Then in the training command when I was instructing in Corpus Christi, whenever the Lexington was not available, we used whatever East Coast deck was available. So I was on, I can't tell you how many carriers. Interesting thing is, there are 5 aircraft carriers that are museums in this country. The Intrepids in New York, the Yorktown in Charleston, the Lexington in Corpus Christi, Texas, the Midway in San Diego, and the Hornet in San Francisco. And I've operated off of 4 of them. So I'm a true antique. What?
For our landing, did you ever get waved off because of
Oh yeah, everybody, yeah. There are lots of reasons to get waved off. Foul decks, you're just not doing well on the approach for whatever reason. And you get, yeah, everybody gets waved off occasionally, and everybody bolters too. It's because sometimes bolters, they do on us what we call a hook skip. The hook can hit the deck and actually bounce over the wire. So you can have an honest hook skip bolter. So everybody bolts. I bolted, not very many times, but.
Hey, Mr. Peterson, not to get too off track, but I have known you as an incredible singer for such a long time. Could you possibly tell us a little bit about your singing background and a little of the experience you had in the military singing?
Oh yeah, we didn't go through the pictures very well, did we? That's me on the Lexington as an LSO. And that's the reason I put that picture in there. That's the Yorktown, and we're taking water over the bow. And just the reason I did that is because the flight deck of the aircraft carrier, depending on how it's loaded, is between 50 and 60 feet off the water. And we're taking water over the bow. That airplane is the T-28, the second airplane I flew. And that particular airplane, I flew that very airplane, on the 14th of December, 1961. I flew in it again in 2015 at EAA. What a thrill for this old guy. This is the Naval Air Training Command Choir. Now I'm in that picture, but you can't see me because all I can see is part of my head. But that's the group that I sang in, and that's how I met my bride of 62 years. We traveled all over the country. And that's why it took me a little longer to get through the flight program. Normally it took 18 months, that was the syllabus length. It took me 19 months because I was in the choir. And one of the places we went was the Minneapolis Aquatennial. Well, wherever the choir went, we were often lined up with girls somehow. So that's how I met my bride, on a Minneapolis Aquatennial trip. So that was a wonderful experience. We sang all over the country. And Dan would appreciate this probably, we sang Thompson's Testament of Freedom with the Jacksonville Symphony. Which was a lot of fun and a great experience. That picture there, just because that's my wife's, one of her favorite pictures of me. Now that again just gives you a little better perspective of the size of the airplane, the T-28. I'm the little skinny guy in the middle. I just put that on the cover of my folder. Partway through the pre-flight, boot camp, every pilot, every student is pictured that way, the exact same picture. And it's sent home to your hometown newspaper. So that went to my hometown newspaper in northern Minnesota.
What's the scariest story you have?
What?
The scariest story.
Scariest story? What's that? Well, yeah, but that was after the Navy. I can tell you the story that, yeah, was scary because I was dumb. I'm a red-hot naval aviator. I'm an LSO. I'm better than anybody. Really red-hot pilot. Well, we were just operating about 180 miles south of San Diego that night, and the weather turned crummy. I mean, really crummy. Well, I happened to be the first one out of Marshall to make my approach to the ship. And as I mentioned about the DME, the distance measuring equipment, that's at the top of the mast. And the top of the mast is 200 feet. Well, we were limited to 300 feet at night, but I cheated. I'm down to less than 200 feet, and my DME said 0. And I hadn't waved off yet. The LSO, the controlling LSO, saw me, gave me a couple of quick corrections, gave me a cut, and I landed on the ship. And that was dumb. Made me a better pilot. I should be dead, and 3 people on the airplane with me, and who knows how many people on the ship. Made me a better pilot, and I would never do anything like that again. Randy.
When did you decide to become a pilot?
How did I start?
How or when did you decide to be a pilot?
Well, it was kind of I had the very good fortune of having a mentor in Southern California when I met him in college. When we met, he was 39 and I was 18. And we got to be good friends. He was medically retired from the Army Air Corps before the split. He flew B-17s in World War II and was shot down twice in B-17s. Managed to escape both times, but he was shot down twice. Between wars, he got off of active duty and managed an airport in Ramona, California. When Korea came along, he was recalled to active duty and they made him a MASH pilot. Everybody's familiar with MASH? He went out one day to rescue some people, and there were too many people for him to carry on his helicopter, but he couldn't make the decision to whom am I going to leave here for certain death. So he tried to take them all, and he staggered it into the air, but he was shot down again for the 3rd time in the helicopter. He never knew what happened to all the people on the helicopter. But he survived, all messed up in body and mind. And when I met him, he was going to college basically as therapy. His body had healed by that time. This is 1962. 1955. His body had healed as well as it was going to heal, but he was still seeing a psychiatrist at the VA hospital in Long Beach, California. And that doctor, shame on him, he kept writing letters to the Department of the Army saying that this guy's being rehabilitated, so they started cutting back on his disability. And finally the guy said he's rehabilitated, so the Army stopped his disability payments. And Al said, okay, if I'm rehabilitated, let me back on active duty, I'll serve out my 1.5 years and retire. And the Army, in their august wisdom, said, no, you're not physically qualified. Here's a man who gave 18 and a half years to his country, shot down 3 times, all messed up in body and mind, and got Zippo from the government. Nothing. Anyways, we became friends, and Al encouraged me. I said, no way I could be a pilot. Come on, that's pie in the sky, you know. I'm the kind of kid that whenever an airplane would fly by, but I never thought I could be one. But Al said, yes, you can. And he said, if you want the best flight training, go in the Navy. So he encouraged me, and I got it.
How are you doing?
Now? Right now the adrenaline's pumping pretty good, so I feel okay.
Okay, I have one question. Not a question, but it's one of my favorite stories that you've always told. The most common question that you always got as an instructor, and what was your response?
The what?
The most common question you got when you were an instructor, and what was your response to that?
Most common question.
About landing on the aircraft carrier. Like,
I think I know what you're talking about a bolter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Students, when I was instructing in the S2, they were always concerned about a bolter. How do I know when I have a bolter? And I said, I'll always back it up on the radio. I'll tell you on the radio, bolter, power and go. But they were still concerned about that, so the best analogy I could ever come up with, and they got a big kick out of it and cleared the air, but they also knew that it was probably right. If you've ever gone into the bathroom at night, stumbled in there, and you're going to sit, and someone had left the seat up, before your butt ever touches the cold porcelain, you know. Nothing you can do about it, but you know. And I said, that's the way it is with the bolter.
I keep thinking about the mental capacity that you have to have when taking off and landing. Do you go by your training and kind of keep emotion out of it?
You don't have time for emotions. Your training kicks in. As I was going to mention that actually, the first time because people ask me, what was it like the first time you ever landed on the aircraft carrier, arrested landing? I don't know. I was too busy. Because you are too busy. Your training kicks in. Before the airplane ever comes to a complete stop, there's a yellow shirt in front of you giving you signals. So, as an example, with the T-28, the first time you arrest, he's right in front of you, off the brakes. Anything above the waist is for you, below the waist is for other people. So, off the brakes, and then the cable will push you back a little bit, and then brakes on, and then hook up, flaps up, taxi. You're simply too busy. The emotions don't kick in until you've completed all of your landings and you're on your way back to the beach. Then you can reflect on, what did I just do? So then you probably fly the best formation of your life, those 4 airplanes. So that's the preparation, if you will. You don't, or your reaction. You don't have time. You're too busy.
I do have a question. Jim, you talked about how small you were compared to some of the other guys.
How small?
Yeah, you were just slight. You were really small. Were most of the pilots similar to that?
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Did you have to keep
There was a
certain
certain mold, if you will, that you kind of fit into. There were no obese pilots. There were height restrictions, but I don't know of anybody that was denied because of that. But my friend Al that I mentioned, he started out as an enlisted man in the Navy, and he wanted to go to flight training, but the Navy wouldn't take him because he was too short. So he went to the Army Air Corps, and they took him.
Jim, on 2 different occasions, you were kind enough to tell me a story, and I'm still not going to get it right, but I hope it's enough to prompt you. It involved a search for a missing pilot, I believe, and
Yes.
finding out years later.
Yes.
If you'd be willing to share that, I'd be grateful.
I mentioned his name, Frank Bennett. I never knew Frank Bennett, but I call him a friend because our lives, due to the tragedies of war, are forever intertwined. He was an Air Force F-105 pilot that was shot down by a MiG-17. The thing was in Vietnam, if your airplane gets hit, the safest place to go is the sea. Get out to sea. Even if you're an Air Force pilot, out over the water, that's the safest place to be. Well, his airplane was hit, and I'm flying one of my 6-hour missions. And his wingman was giving this running commentary on the guard channel, which transmits to everybody, his position, and he said it was a good ejection, good seat separation, and a good parachute. Then he lost him in the haze, and then he had to leave because he was running out of gas. So he gave the last position a range and bearing from Da Nang, Tak An. So I looked at my instruments in my airplane, and I figured I was 20 miles from the guy. So I stupidly called the ship and asked permission to go find him. And the ship, to show you what ridiculousness the military goes to, inter-service rivalries and who's senior to who and all this stuff. The ship didn't have the authority to do that. Because the Air Force ran the search and rescue missions out of Saigon. So they had to check with Saigon. And the Air Force general, whoever was in charge there. Anyways, he said, no, keep him out of there. He's going to screw up our Dumbo. Dumbo was the amphibious airplane that the Air Force used for search and rescue. Well, so I'm supposedly a good young aircraft commander and following orders, and I said, okay. Well, because the ship said, reference your last negative, continue your search. So I did. 3 hours later, the ship called back and said, hey, the Air Force can't find this guy, and they want some help. So I turned around and went as fast as my little airplane could go. But by that time, I was so far away that one of my wingmen, my good friend Joe Saltz, because again, we had 6 airplanes in the air all the time, he was much closer to this range and bearing from Da Nang, Tak An, that he went in there and he found the guy within 20 minutes, drowned. And the only reason I know he was drowned is because I saw it in the message traffic that night, because the cruiser St. Paul picked up his body. And I didn't know for years who that guy was, or when he drowned, or why he drowned. Well, I don't know if you remember, some of you may, that the Vietnam Wall has a traveling wall, and it was here in Waupaca quite a few years ago. So I went out, they set it up out in King. So I went out there and I'm standing there, and somebody who was with the wall saw my obvious distress and he asked if he could help me. So I told him my story, and he said, well, if you can give me a date, I can tell you who was lost on that date. So I ran home, got out my logbook, found the date, went back to the wall, and the guy punched it in his computer. 3 names came up. So I still don't know who it is. 3 Air Force pilots were lost on that day, April 6, 1965. So I let it go at that. At least it's down to 3. You know. Well, then I discovered that the wall has its own website, if you will. You can look up people on the wall. So I typed in the first name, and nothing came up. Typed in the second name, and it was same airplane, but body not recovered. You know, ejected at sea, body not recovered. So that's not my guy. Typed in the third name, and it was a different airplane. Oh, now what? So I said, well, maybe I messed something up, and I went back and retyped in the first name, Frank Bennett. After 43 years, I know who he is. Nothing I could have done for him, but I know who he is. You can leave notes on the guy's wall, on the guy's page on the wall. So I poured out my soul to Major Bennett. He was an Air Force major. That I was sorry that I was unable to find him or help him in any way. Well, a couple weeks later, I got an email back from a nephew of his in Florida. And he said, I think I know a little more about my uncle's accident than you do. When your airplane is damaged, all bets are off in terms of ejection. So this normal sequence is canopy blows and then the seat goes. Well, the canopy didn't blow. He went through the canopy. The seat will do that. It's rocket-propelled seat. It's going to go through the canopy. But he was somehow rendered unconscious, and then everything is automatic, the entire sequence, the seat separation, the chute opening, and all that stuff. So he landed in the water unconscious, but breathing, and drowned instantly. But Frank Bennett is a friend of mine. No guy, he was just looking at his uncle's site, I suppose. Yeah, yeah. He just saw his uncle's site and saw my note and decided to answer it. So what I did for him, those of you who know Dr. Lowell Peterson, he was a flight surgeon for F-105s in Thailand, and he wrote a couple of books. One of which was called The Birds Were Silver then. It was about his experience as a F-105 flight surgeon. So I got one of those books from Lowell and I sent it to this guy's nephew in Florida as a thank you. Oh my. All right, well, I've probably told you more than I know, so.
I want to thank you all for coming today. Let's give a round of applause for Jim Peterson. Thank you, Cindy, with the Quilts of Valor. Another round of applause for Cindy for the Quilts of Valor. Thank you very much.
Means more than I can tell you.
Now you have a great deal of backstory of why he earned that quilt. I want to thank you all for coming. We have just some light nosh and coffee and drinks, and we'd love to fellowship with you and visit. If you want to head back over this way, we appreciate you coming, and thanks again from the Peterson family.
You
Thank
bet.
you all.